The roses bled that summer. Their petals were not the soft blush of any ordinary bloom, but a crimson so deep it seemed to bruise the air around them. They unfurled heavy and thick, like wounds refusing to close, and the soil beneath them steamed in the early morning as though still hot from a hidden fire. Every slave who passed the garden averted their gaze, for the roses seemed to watch, and their scent was not sweet but cloying, like copper, like iron, like blood pressed fresh from a wound. The mistress, tall and pale, wore her vanity like a veil, and she adored those roses above all her possessions. She tended them each dusk, gloved hands brushing the leaves, whispering names to them as though they were her children. No one else dared draw near the garden's fence after sundown, for in the lamplight the blooms seemed to sway without wind, nodding as though they listened and understood. It was the servants who first whispered of the thing that came by night. They claimed the earth shifted when no one stood near, as though a hand worked beneath the roots, loosening the soil, stirring it with some hidden offering. They spoke in hushed voices of footprints that vanished by dawn, too small for a man, too light for a beast. "The roses ain't natural," old Esther muttered, crossing herself. "They drink what don't belong to 'em." Yet the mistress only laughed. "Fools," she told them, her voice sharp as a blade. "The roses thrive because I love them. Nothing more. But love does not make the soil bleed." By midsummer the air itself seemed to thicken near the garden. Flies gathered at the fence as if drawn by rot, and at night the cicadas hushed in eerie silence, leaving only the rasp of unseen things moving beneath the ground. Servants began to hurry past the garden after dusk, heads lowered, lips moving in prayers half-remembered. Children cried if forced to fetch water from the pump nearby, swearing they heard the roses whisper their names. One night, Sarah, the girl with eyes that never rose above the floorboards, was seen standing alone by the fence. The moon carved her silhouette into the earth, her hands clasped tightly before her, her head bowed. She did not touch the roses, nor did she speak, but the blooms leaned toward her like supplicants, their heavy heads bowing in unison. From the kitchen window, Esther watched, her breath shallow in her chest. She swore the girl's lips moved in silence, shaping words that the roses seemed to understand. When the mistress discovered Esther's staring, she struck her across the mouth and hissed, "Do not watch what you do not understand." The next morning, one of the hounds was found dead at the garden's edge. Its body was whole, untouched by teeth or claw, but its fur was damp as though dipped in dew, and the earth beneath it shone dark and wet. The mistress ordered the carcass buried, but the ground spat it out by the following dawn, dragged half out of its grave, its snout pointing toward the roses. From then on, the servants swore there was something beneath the soil. They whispered of a shape glimpsed at the edge of lamplight, a pale hand curling upward from the dirt, sinking again when seen too clearly. They spoke of sighs soft as breath against glass, seeping from the roots when the wind was still, and each time the mistress pruned a bloom, the cut stem leaked not sap but a slow dark trickle that stained her gloves and refused to wash away. "Who tends the roses?" one boy dared ask in the smokehouse, his voice trembling. "Not the mistress," another muttered. "Not Sarah," a third whispered, though his eyes darted to the shadows where she sat silent, unmoving. It was said that on the hottest night of August, the soil split. The garden shivered though no storm passed, and the air filled with a stench of iron and decay. The mistress, lantern in hand, stood among her roses, her face lit from beneath like a mask. And the servants, peering from doorways, swore they saw a shape rise from the roots, a long shadow taller than any man, head bent low to whisper in her ear. She smiled, lips parted as though receiving a lover's vow, and when the shadow sank back into the earth, she plucked a bloom and pressed it to her mouth. That night, Sarah was heard humming beneath her breath, a tune without words. The sound wound through the quarters, thin and eerie, until even the hounds whined and clawed at their chains. By morning, the roses had doubled in size. Their thorns gleamed black as wet nails, and the soil around them was no longer red but dark, sodden, glistening, as though it had drunk deep of something more than rain. The mistress ordered the fence raised higher so none but she might enter. Yet still the servants whispered. Still they swore that the roots spread farther each night, threading unseen beneath the yard, searching, and Sarah, walking past with her gaze still lowered, left no prints in the dust. That was the summer the roses learned to breathe. Their petals opened wider than mouths, and in the night their sighs rattled the panes of glass. Some swore they smelled not flowers, but old blood left too long in the sun. And though no one dared approach, all knew the truth, that the garden was no longer hers alone, that something had claimed it and fed it, and whispered through it. The mistress slept with a rose pressed upon her nightstand, its head bowed toward her as though in prayer. And outside, in the dark where no lantern burned, the garden shivered with unseen hands. The roots pressed deeper, the earth stirred, and somewhere beneath the soil something laughed. They said her silence was not born of fear, but of covenant. Sarah moved through the mistress's house like a shadow too deliberate to be overlooked, too heavy to be forgotten. She bent her head as custom demanded, hands folded, steps measured, yet there was weight in her quiet, an echo that clung to the rafters long after she passed. The clink of chains was never heard on her, though every other servant bore the sound. Instead, she carried silence itself like iron shackles, binding the air wherever she lingered. Her eyes were lowered always, fixed on the floorboards, but there was heat beneath their dark lashes. Those who dared glimpse her face swore they felt something smolder there, a secret burning low and patient like coal beneath ash. It was not hatred alone nor grief, but something older, something the tongue dared not speak. The hounds knew it first. They were beasts bred for terror, muscled and sharp-toothed, trained to lunge at any servant who strayed. But Sarah's shadow, thin, slight, draped across the dirt, froze them where they stood. They whined, tails curling, teeth hidden, eyes fixed on her with the fear one gives not to prey but to fire. One tried to cross her path once, its chain dragging across the yard. The animal stumbled mid-stride, shrieked as though struck, and refused ever after to near her again. The mistress noticed. She noticed everything. At table one night her pale eyes lingered on Sarah too long, lips curling around her glass. "The girl walks lighter than air," she murmured to her husband, her voice soft, snake-like. "Yet she carries storms in her silence. Have you seen?" The master grunted, uninterested, but the mistress's gaze sharpened. Her roses had begun to swell too richly, too redly, and she did not fail to note that Sarah's shadow lengthened across the garden fence each evening, stretching further than any natural light should allow. Among the quarters, whispers swelled like smoke. "She speaks with the dead," Esther muttered, rocking in the dim firelight. "She speaks with something older," another voice replied, hushed. "Best not to say her name at night," a third warned. The children listened wide-eyed, but Sarah never corrected them. She sat still, back straight, eyes lowered, lips sealed as though stitched. When a child dared ask, "What do you carry in your silence?" Sarah raised her gaze just once, and the boy wailed for 3 nights without rest, claiming her eyes showed him a door he must never open. Yet the truth seeped out in fragments. She was said to have come from no place known, sold and traded as many were, but she carried a name no one remembered giving her. Sarah, so simple, so bare, and yet when spoken, it fell heavy from the mouth, dragging air down with it like a stone into water. On the hottest evening of August, she was found standing alone beneath the great oak. The moon carved her figure into the earth, her hands pressed flat against its bark. Esther, passing by with a bucket of water, swore she saw the tree bend toward her. Its branches swaying though the air was still. The leaves whispered, shivering like pages turned by invisible hands. Esther dropped the bucket and fled, but the water did not soak the ground. It steamed, hissing against the dirt as though the earth itself rejected it. That night Sarah sang. It was the only time her voice was ever heard. Low, a hum more than a tune. The sound wound through the yard and into the mistress's house, curling against the windows like smoke. The melody was not sweet nor sorrowful, but old, older than chains, older than names. It was a lullaby for graves, a hymn for soil that had drunk too much blood. The mistress woke trembling, clutching her rose to her breast. "Do you hear it?" she hissed to her husband. But he slept on, deaf to the song. Only the servants stirred, their eyes wet, their bodies stiff, for the tune pressed on their bones, bidding them remember. When dawn broke, Sarah's lips were sealed again, but the oak beneath which she had stood dripped a slow resin, dark as tar, pooling at its roots. The mistress confronted her in the garden, standing with the roses between them. "You walk with silence heavier than chains," the mistress said, voice like glass striking stone. "And yet you stir what should not wake. What is it you carry, girl?" Sarah's head bowed. But her silence answered louder than words. The roses leaned toward her, as if to shield her from the mistress's glare. That night the hounds howled without ceasing. Their cries clawed through the quarters, setting every child to tears. None dared approach them, for their chains rattled though no beast moved, and their eyes rolled white as though seeing shadows no one else could bear. And when the cries ceased, the servants found claw marks gouged deep into the earth, not from the dogs but from hands. Long, thin fingers traced into the dirt as if something had crawled, dragging itself from shadow to shadow, leaving no body behind. Sarah was seen last at the edge of the quarters, her figure faint in the lantern light. She lifted her head once, gaze fixed on the house where her mistress slept, and her silence pressed down upon the yard like a storm before lightning. The next morning, the mistress woke with soil on her sheets. It began with a cup no one dared claim. A porcelain chalice white as bone stood upon the mistress's table, gleaming in lamplight. It was delicate, rimmed with gilt, painted with roses that curled and bled along its surface. She had owned many vessels, crystal and silver, but this cup she kept near always, though she did not drink from it. Her hand lingered above it often, her gaze resting there longer than upon her plate, her husband, or even her roses. Yet each dawn the servants swore the cup was not where it had been left. Placed at the table's head one night, it would be found closer to the window by morning. Left upon the mantel, it would reappear by the mistress's bed. It travelled with no sound, no witness. Its position shifted as though guided by a hand that left no prints. "It is only your neglect," the master grumbled, when she spoke of it once, her voice sharp and thin. "You move it without care." But she knew her memory had not failed her. The cup wandered. It sought. The servants knew more than they spoke. In the quarters, whispers spread like creeping ivy. "The chalice ain't right," Esther murmured, lips pressed against her hand to muffle the sound. "It walks at night," another answered, eyes wide. "I heard it breathe," a boy confessed, trembling, and was struck into silence. The mistress forbade such talk, yet their voices travelled, slipping through cracks like draughts in winter. And still the chalice moved. By candlelight, Sarah was seen polishing the mistress's table, her shadow long upon the boards. She never touched the cup. Her hand stilled when they neared it, as though iron nails pinned her wrists in place. Yet those who watched swore the chalice shifted toward her, inch by inch, as though yearning for her touch. One evening, the mistress commanded her directly. "Bring me the cup," she said, her voice brittle as frost. Sarah obeyed, her steps slow, her eyes never lifting. She reached, her fingers trembling as they neared the porcelain rim, and then her hand stopped. She stood frozen, chest rising shallow, her lips moving though no sound came. The chalice quivered, not by her touch, not by any draught, but of its own will. It shook upon the table as though something within stirred, then toppled onto its side. No liquid spilled, though the mistress swore she had filled it. Only a dark stain lingered at its mouth, glistening like the sheen of old blood. The mistress struck Sarah for her hesitation, her palm hard across the girl's face. But Sarah did not cry. She turned her head slowly, her silence pressing into the room like a weight. And the chalice, though fallen, rolled to rest against her foot. The mistress banished her then. Yet that night she found the cup again upon her bedside. And this time it was not empty. A bitter scent clung to it, sharp and metallic, filling the chamber until she gagged. The roses painted along its rim seemed darker, their petals dripping into thorns that had not been there before. She hurled the cup into the hearth, but it did not shatter. The fire hissed, the logs cracked, yet when the flames rose high, the chalice sat unmarked among the embers, glowing faint as though lit from within. By morning, it was upon her table once more. That week the household began to sour. Milk curdled though it was fresh. Meat bled too long, its juices dark as tar. Children grew restless, waking from dreams they refused to name. And the cup, always the cup, moved closer to the mistress's place at every meal, until it sat before her hands as though awaiting her lips. "You must drink," Esther whispered once, forgetting herself, forgetting her fear. "It is waiting for you." The mistress's hand flashed like a serpent, and the old woman fell silent, blood beading from her split lip. Yet the words lingered, gnawing, burrowing into the mistress's ears. "Drink." One night, unable to bear its silent presence, she lifted the chalice. Its weight startled her, heavier than porcelain should be, as though filled with stones or soil. The liquid inside shimmered, not wine nor water, but something darker, thick, clinging to the cup as it swirled. She raised it to her nose, but the stench drove her back. Iron rot, a grave left open in summer. And yet behind the stench, sweetness, something coaxing. Her lips trembled above its rim. The air around her hushed, pressing in. The roses on the mantel seemed to lean closer, their petals blackened in shadow. She thought she heard a hum, low, steady, like a voice beneath the earth. Drink, she nearly did. But then Sarah's shadow passed the door. The mistress froze, the chalice hovering just shy of her lips. Sarah did not enter, did not speak, but her shadow slipped across the floorboards, thin and long, stretching toward the cup. The liquid inside shuddered, recoiling from her nearness. The mistress dropped the chalice onto the table, gasping. It did not tip. It stood upright where she set it, its dark surface still as glass, though her hands shook like branches in storm wind. From that night the mistress barred her door. She placed the chalice in a locked cabinet, but each dawn it was freed again, sitting at her table, closer and closer to her hand. The servants whispered it, no longer waited to be lifted. They swore in the darkest hours that they saw the liquid rise, ripple, as though something within pressed upward. Eager to breathe, and Sarah in her silence passed by the table each morning, her shadow bending toward the chalice, her lips moving without sound. The mistress began to dream of drowning. She woke with her throat raw, the taste of iron clinging to her tongue. And one morning when the house stirred to life, the chalice was found not upon the table at all, but upon her pillow, waiting. The house remembered what the living had long forgotten. It began at the hour when shadows press thickest against the floorboards, when the last ember dies in the hearth, and the air hangs heavy with the weight of unseen things. Beneath the mistress's chamber, beneath the squeak of worn boards, there arose a sound, a low, wavering hymn. It was not melody nor voice, but a vibration, a pulse that threaded through the walls and climbed her spine with cold fingers. Half prayer, half curse, it resonated with the weight of centuries, of bones pressed beneath the earth. The mistress awoke with a start. The candle by her bed trembled and guttered, casting the room into a dance of fractured light. She pressed her hands to her chest, listening. The song came again, rising, falling, a chorus of whispers sewn into the floorboards themselves. No wind stirred. No mouth sang. And yet, she knew it was not a dream. Esther, crouched in the corner of the servants' quarters, whispered to the others, her voice tight as cobwebs. "They hum beneath the boards," she said. "They hum for the girl," another muttered. "She calls them," a third added, shivering. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, yet her presence pressed upon the house like a storm. The hymn twisted through the beams, a thread only she could tug, bending the air to her will. The mistress felt it coil around her throat, around her wrists, around her mind. Sleep had fled her entirely. Only this sound remained, patient and relentless. The hounds chained in the yard began to whine, low and trembling, their paws scraping at the boards. When the song lifted, they fell silent, as if listening too closely to something they should not comprehend. A shadow passed over the wall, though no candle flickered that high. At the table below, the chalice waited, innocuous yet threatening, untouched but brimming with the scent of iron and soil. Its presence now hummed with the same resonance, vibrating against the mistress's nerves. She imagined its surface rippling, the liquid inside stirring in time with the song beneath her bed. The roses on the mantel leaned unnaturally toward the sound, petals brushing the ceiling as though reaching for some invisible hand. The mistress called for Sarah. Her voice cracked through the night, brittle as dried leaves. "Girl, come here." There was no reply, only the hum, rising louder, curling into corners, seeping beneath doors, filling the house with its slow, heavy pulse. Windows rattled, though no wind blew. The candle sputtered and went out, leaving her in darkness as the song pressed closer, as though the boards themselves had lifted and bent down to her. Esther, in the servants' quarters, shivered. "She sings the bones awake," she whispered, clutching her knees. Who?" another hissed. "Sarah," Esther breathed. "Always Sarah." The mistress rose, trembling, and pressed her ear to the floor. The song was clear now, articulate in its menace. Words, half-remembered prayers and half-forgotten curses, stitched together in a voice that was neither human nor spirit. It spoke of debts unpaid, of blood hidden beneath soil, of chains unbroken and vows sealed in silence. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to warp. The edges of her face stretched, shadows crawling up her neck entwining with her hair. The roses on the mantel turned black at the tips, their petals curling as though recoiling from the sound. Then she saw it, a faint glow beneath the floorboards, shifting like smoke, curling toward the bedposts, toward her feet. The glow pulsed with the rhythm of the song, and she felt the boards beneath her quiver, as if the house itself exhaled. Suddenly the hounds howled in unison, a sound that rent the night like tearing cloth. The song intensified, folding over itself, rising to a fevered pitch. The mistress stumbled backward, knocking the chalice from the table. It landed upright. The liquid inside shimmered, a dark viscous gleam that reflected the faint luminescence from the floor. She swore she saw the surface writhe, twisting upward as if reaching for her. A whisper, clear and direct, pierced the room. "Drink." The mistress froze. The air seemed to thicken, sticky as blood. Every candle in the house flickered, though no draught moved. The hymn shifted tone, from a chant to a shiver of dissonant melody, and with it came a smell, iron, earth, and something older, something that had waited in the walls since the house's first brick was laid. She tried to scream. Her throat tightened. Her hands flew to her mouth. The song pressed in, twisting, bending, as if the very boards themselves conspired to silence her. And then she saw Sarah, or what Sarah had become. The girl's shadow stretched impossibly long across the floor, merging with the glow beneath the boards. No feet, no legs, just a shifting, undulating darkness that pulsed with the same rhythm as the hymn. Her lips moved in the darkness, forming the song's words without sound, shaping the air itself. The mistress stumbled back against the wall. The roses leaned violently forward, thorns brushing her cheek. The chalice quivered once more, and a drop of liquid, dark as iron, escaped its rim, hanging in the air before falling to the floor with a hiss that echoed like fire meeting water. Outside, the hounds fell silent. The wind did not blow. The house waited, trembling with the weight of the song. And then the floorboards cracked. A fissure ran beneath her feet, thin at first, then widening with a sound like splintering bone. A faint light spilled from beneath, cold and green, and the hymn rose to a shriek that pressed against her mind. She fell to her knees, staring as something alive and patient, slipped through the crack, reaching, coiling, pressing upward toward her with fingers of shadow. The last thing she saw before she was forced backward, clawing for purchase, was Sarah's face, or the suggestion of a face emerging from the floor, eyes black as tar, lips parted in the hymn's final word, "Yours." Some roots are born to remember what men wish to forget. Beneath Sarah's cot, hidden in the dust and shadow, lay the herb. Its leaves were darkened, bruised black at the edges as though kissed by fire and soil both. Its scent rose in the air, bitter, metallic, curling into the nostrils and clinging there, lingering long after breath had passed. Those who inhaled it felt a memory they could not place, an ache threaded deep into bone. The mistress recoiled when it was found, though she could not tear her gaze from the leaf. Something in its twisted veins promised vengeance older than the house itself. Sarah knelt beside it, hands trembling, eyes cast low. She swore she had not touched it, though the scent clung to her fingers like dew to spider silk. Her silence weighed heavier than chains, heavier than guilt, heavier than any whip the master could raise. Even Esther, old and weathered, dared not speak, for fear the root would answer her in its own bitter voice. "This herb, it is forbidden," the mistress hissed, her voice slicing through the kitchen like a blade. "How came it here?" Sarah did not respond. Her lips moved, but no sound came. The air seemed to stiffen around her, pressing in, and for a heartbeat, the herbs on the shelves seemed to lean away, recoiling as if recognizing some kinship in the root she had not touched. Esther muttered under her breath, "It calls her." It calls her. The herb's power was whispered in corners, carried like smoke through the quarters. Children spoke of it in trembling voices. "She moves the plants," one said. "They hide for her," another whispered. "The bitter root drinks what it wants," a third added, eyes wide and unblinking. That night the kitchen smelled of iron and earth. The fire sputtered, casting shadows that swelled and shrank like living things. The mistress dared to touch the root, her fingers brushing against its bruised leaves. The taste of it lingered, metallic, sharp like copper pressed into the tongue. She felt the pulse of something beneath the boards, beneath the floors, threading its way through the walls toward her heart. Sarah knelt in the corner, silent, eyes lowered, yet the root's presence seemed to orbit her. It twisted toward her as though drawn to her essence, bending and shivering in response to her unseen summons. The room itself hummed with it, a low vibration that made the glassware tremble, and the candle flames lean unnaturally toward the girl. The hounds whined outside, a deep rolling sorrow echoing from their chained throats. Esther pressed a hand to her chest, whispering prayers into the air, yet the words were swallowed by the herb's scent and the girl's silence. The root seemed alive, sensing, remembering, hungering. The mistress recoiled, dropping the herb. It did not stay. The bruised leaves twitched and twisted as though alive, inching across the floor toward the cot. She lunged to push it away, but it recoiled from her touch, spinning back toward Sarah as if fleeing to its rightful keeper. "Do you see?" Esther whispered, voice raw. "It moves for her, not for you." The mistress's face paled. The roses in the garden beyond the window seemed to shiver in the night wind, blackened at the tips, leaning toward the house as though listening. And the chalice, still resting upon its table in the parlor, pulsed faintly, as if synchronized to the rhythm of the root and the girl who commanded it. A soft sound emerged then, one that made the mistress's spine tingle like ice running through veins. The herb whispered, not with voice but with resonance, a rustle in the air, a vibration in the boards, a low hiss only those who feared its weight could hear. Blood. Blood? It seemed to say, faint, deliberate, coaxing. The mistress's hand shot out to cover her ears, but the sound burrowed beneath her skin, threading into bone. Her knees buckled as the root crept closer to Sarah's shadow, as if being drawn into some silent covenant. And then Sarah moved. Not with haste, not with sound, but with inevitability. Her hand hovered above the herb, fingers trembling yet unbending, and the leaves lifted from the floor, shivering in mid-air. The bruised edges curled as though breathing. The scent intensified, pressing into the mistress's throat and eyes, and she realized, horrified, that the herb obeyed no human hand but that of the girl. "Why? Why do you call it?" The mistress choked, voice breaking. Sarah's lips remained sealed. Yet the root shivered violently, pulsing as if alive, its tendrils reaching upward like hands seeking a heart. The candlelight warped, and for a brief heartbeat, the fire cast shadows that shaped themselves into figures, faces screaming, hands clawing from the floorboards, eyes black and pleading. Esther whispered a warning, trembling. "It remembers," she said. "It knows. And it answers." The house itself seemed to sigh then, walls bending slightly inward, the floorboards vibrating in time with the herb's pulse. The roses in the garden outside darkened further, petals curling as though closing in anticipation. Even the chalice in the parlor shimmered faintly, liquid sloshing though untouched, responding to some silent rhythm emanating from the root. And then it happened. A single leaf shot from the floor toward Sarah, twisting mid-air. It landed gently upon her outstretched palm, quivering, dripping a dark sap that smelled of iron and wet soil. She closed her fingers slowly around it, and the herb fell still. The room stilled. Even the hounds ceased their whining. The candlelight wavered, then froze, as if waiting for some judgment to descend. The mistress swallowed hard, dread pooling in her stomach, for in that moment she understood. The root, the song beneath the floors, the chalice, even the roses, they answered to the girl. Not the house, not her, not any mortal hand. Only Sarah. And as the girl rose, standing silent and impossibly still, a shadow spread from her like ink across the floor, darker than any night could hold. It stretched toward the door, toward the stairs, toward the garden. Within its inky depth, the bruised leaf trembled, faintly glowing as though breathing. Outside, the wind rose suddenly, carrying with it a scent of earth and iron. The garden quivered. The roses leaned violently toward the house, petals blackened and glistening in moonlight. The mistress, frozen with horror, watched as Sarah's shadow merged with the bruised root, binding to it, feeding it, commanding it. And for the first time, the silence around the girl was no longer empty. It was full, alive and patient. From beneath the floorboards came a single, faint sound, a hum low and deliberate, threading upward, wrapping the house in its invisible coils. The herb, trembling in Sarah's hand, pulsed with it, a heartbeat older than any living thing in Tennessee, and somewhere in the shadows the chalice rattled, though no hand touched it. The night was alive, and it waited. The air thickened heavy and sour, as though breathing had become a struggle against some unseen pressure. Shadows trembled across the mistress's chamber, bending unnaturally with the flicker of candlelight. And then they came. The first of them, moths and beetles crawling from the corners, swarming in the dark. Their wings rattled against one another, and the walls a dry, brittle symphony like bones clattering in hollow jars. The sound filled the room, echoing in every crevice, pressing against the mistress's chest with a weight that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the house itself. They gathered slowly at the edges of her bed frame, clustering at the posts and rails, black as sin yet flickering in the lamplight. She tried to scream, but her voice stuck, strangled by fear and the thick, choking air. The creatures seemed to move not as insects, but as one mind, circling, waiting, watching, their small, glimmering eyes fixed upon her. From the shadowed corner, Sarah emerged, her feet silent, her hands folded, her eyes cast low. She did not touch the swarm, but her presence commanded them. They swirled tighter, a black cloud that bent and shifted with her will, wings brushing against one another in a rhythm too precise to be natural. Esther, crouched in the doorway, whispered into the dark. Trembling, they answer her. They always answer her. They'll bite, they'll sting, a boy hissed. They bite the blood of the guilty, Esther said, voice hollow. The mistress's hands shot to her chest, pressing against the cage of her ribs. The insects rapped and rattled against the wood like a warning, like the ticking of a clock, counting down toward some inevitable doom. Their wings flickered shadows across the walls, forming shapes that suggested hands, faces, clawed and twisted in anguish. She blinked, and they were gone, only to reappear moments later, pressing against her bedposts, waiting. A chill ran down her spine as the whisper of the hymn from beneath the floorboards drifted upward, blending with the rattle of wings. Sarah did not speak. She never needed to. The insects pulsed in time with her silence, the rhythm of their wings becoming a language older than any tongue. The chalice sat upon the table, liquid, dark and viscous, catching the candlelight in slow rolling waves. It shimmered faintly, as though reflecting not the room but the shadows themselves. The insects turned toward it for a heartbeat, their wings brushing against one another in unison, and the mistress noticed something horrifying. The surface of the liquid trembled, echoing the dance above it. She tried to flee, but her limbs felt leaden. The swarm seemed to anticipate her movement, flowing like a river of black toward the open space around her feet. She stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The insects barely hesitated. They flowed around the fallen wood, folding into the shadows as though the room itself were alive. Esther's voice came again, trembling and urgent. "Do not look them in the eye," she hissed. "They are not creatures, they are watchers. They know." The mistress, panting, turned toward Sarah. The girl's head tilted slightly, eyes lowered, lips pressed in their silent line. "And then motion!" Sarah raised her hand, delicate and deliberate. The swarm stilled. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The insects shivered in place, then leapt toward the bedposts in a single fluid motion. They clung, bristling, forming patterns that seemed almost symbolic. Spirals, sigils, shapes like claws and eyes. A low, buzzing hum rose from their bodies, faint at first, then louder. A vibration that shook the floorboards, rattled the windows, pressed against the mistress's ears like the echo of a coffin lid being sealed. She staggered backward, gaze fixed on the wall opposite the bed, where shadows stretched and writhing faces seemed to emerge, mouthing words she could not hear. The chalice tipped slightly on the table, a droplet of black liquid escaping to the wood below. Where it fell, a tendril of shadow slithered as if the floor itself had taken notice of the swarm above. The insects twitched in response, wings rattling harder, faster, a frenzy coiling into rhythm, and then, from somewhere beneath the floor, a single, piercing note joined the chorus, a hum low and deliberate, Sarah's silent voice echoing through the boards. The insects spiraled upward, wings thrashing, forming a tornado of black over the mistress's head. She screamed at last, but her voice was swallowed in the storm. Esther's hand clutched at the doorframe. "She calls them." "The girl calls them." The mistress dropped to her knees, clutching at the sheets, her body pressed to the mattress as the swarm descended. They did not sting, they did not bite. Yet the sensation of their presence was unbearable, like a weight pressing upon every bone, every muscle, every nerve. It was a touch older than cruelty, more intimate than fear, something the mind cannot name. Sarah lifted her hand again, and the swarm parted in the center, hovering above the chalice. The liquid rippled, drawing the mistress's gaze downward. There, faint in the reflection, she saw not herself, but the shape of Sarah's shadow coiled impossibly long, stretching across the floor and into the darkness beyond the room. A single beetle broke from the mass, gliding silently toward her face, its legs brushing her cheek. She blinked, and the insect transformed, its shell black as obsidian, its wings flashing with the faintest ember of light. She caught in that instant the reflection of countless eyes staring from the darkness, unblinking, judging. The swarm shivered as one, wings rattling like dry bones, and then, in a motion too sudden to follow, it dispersed into the corners of the room. The hum beneath the floorboards faded to a whisper, leaving only the flutter of wings, faint, waiting, patient. The mistress fell backward onto the floor, trembling. The chalice sat upright, untouched, the black liquid still gleaming. The roses on the mantel leaned slightly toward the window, their petals blackened and curling, as though sensing some unseen danger approaching. And in the doorway, Sarah's shadow lingered, thin and impossibly long. It stretched across the room, merging with the darkness of the corners, her lips unmoving, yet whispering a command the insects had obeyed and would obey again. Outside, the wind rose sharply, rattling the panes. The hounds whined, their eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. And beneath the floorboards, a faint vibration began, a prelude, a pulse, a rhythm that promised the next performance, the next dance. The mistress, chest heaving, stared at the shadows, knowing that this was only the beginning. The night held its breath, and the darkness waited like a patient predator. By candlelight, the vial glimmered, its liquid black as night water, reflecting the trembling flame in ripples that seemed almost deliberate. The mistress stared at it, hand trembling, and the shadows in the room warped as though the walls themselves leaned closer. Whispers rose from corners unseen, curling around the beams and floorboards, pressing against the ears like the breath of the long dead. The potion moved, not subtly, not by accident, but shifting within the glass, eager, alive, as though it had its own will. Its own thirst. Esther, crouched in the doorway, muttered a prayer she had not spoken in decades. God forgive me. It stirs, she whispered, eyes wide. They all stir for her, another voice replied, faint and shivering. The girl, she calls them, Esther said, clutching her hands to her chest. Sarah stood in the far corner, hands folded, eyes lowered. She did not touch the vial, yet its liquid quivered when she moved, a subtle ripple that belied intent. The chalice in the parlor had begun to shimmer faintly once more, the black liquid inside mimicking the vial's restless pulse. Even the roses in the garden leaned toward the house as if drawn by an unseen hand. The mistress swallowed, throat dry, her eyes fixed on the vial. It was small, fragile porcelain capped with wax that seemed to glow faintly. Yet within it, the darkness swirled, thick and slow, alive in ways that chilled her blood. Her hands shook as she reached for it, half wanting to touch, half fearing that to do so would unseal some horror beyond reckoning. A soft hiss sounded from the floorboards, a vibration that threaded up through her feet and knees, pressing against every bone. It was the song again, the same half-prayer, half-curse that had haunted her dreams, the melody Sarah summoned in silence. The vial shivered in response, rocking gently, dark liquid climbing the walls of glass as though eager to spill, eager to escape. Do you see it? Esther hissed, her voice raw. It moves. It knows. The mistress froze, sensing the pulse of something ancient, something patient and deliberate, weaving its influence through the air, through the boards, through the very walls. The vial's contents shifted again, curling toward the edge of the glass, defying gravity, defying reason. A drop escaped, forming a bead along the rim. Clinging like a heartbeat suspended in air, the air thickened with a scent she could not name. Iron. Earth, rot, and a sweetness underneath that made her stomach turn. She gagged, stepping back, but the vial seemed to follow her with its movement, tilting subtly toward the spot she had vacated. It was not simple motion. It was intent, hunger. Sarah's eyes lifted for the first time, faint and deliberate. Her gaze swept the room, settling on the mistress, and the vial quivered as if recognizing its target. A whisper rose, almost imperceptible, threading through the boards. "Drink." The mistress recoiled. "No, those—" But the words faltered, snatched away by the pulse beneath the floor, the whisper of the wind outside, the hum of the house itself. The chalice in the parlor rattled faintly, its black liquid rising and falling as though synchronized with the vial's pulse. Shadows twisted across the walls, forming shapes, hands stretched long, mouths opening in silent scream, eyes unblinking and observing. Esther's voice trembled. Do not let it near you. It waits. It waits for your lips." The mistress's knees buckled. She dropped to the floor, staring at the vial, her fingers curling toward it despite her terror. The candle flickered violently, smoke curling upward like tendrils of black hair, and the room seemed to warp, walls bending slightly inward, pressing closer. A low hiss came from the vial, faint but deliberate, and then a droplet leapt from its rim, hovering in air before falling toward the table. It did not splash. It hovered, quivering, suspended as if weighing its options, as if deciding. The chalice rattled once more, the black liquid inside forming a ripple that seemed to echo the drop above. The roses outside leaned further, petals curling, thorns gleaming in the pale moonlight, as though sensing a predator stalking across the room. The mistress reached out again. Her fingers brushed the vial and it quivered violently, a ripple coursing through the dark liquid, like a shiver of recognition. The candle flame went out in that instant, leaving the room black except for the faint glow of the vial and the distant reflection from the chalice. A hiss became a low, insistent hum, threading through the floorboards and walls, rising to a crescendo that pressed against her ears and teeth alike. And then, impossibly, a shadow emerged, not from the walls, not from the floor, but from beneath the table, stretching, curling, forming the shape of a hand. It reached toward her, black and trembling, fingers elongated and twitching like roots. The mistress screamed, her voice swallowed by the hum. The vial leapt from the table, hovering in mid-air, tilting toward her lips. Her fingers froze inches away, heart-pounding sweat slicking her skin. She could not move, could not flee. The song beneath the boards threaded into her mind, looping, pressing, calling. Sarah stepped closer, silent, eyes lowered. The shadow recoiled, curling toward the girl, merging with her, feeding on her presence. The vial stabilized, tilting slowly, deliberately, as though guided by Sarah's unseen hand. Its liquid shimmered, dark as obsidian, faintly glowing, alive. Outside, the wind rose sharply, rattling the window panes. The hounds whined, back legs scrabbling against the ground. The roses in the garden bent violently, their petals blackening as though burning from some internal flame. The mistress, frozen in terror, realized the inevitable. The poison would find her. Her lips parted involuntarily. The vial trembled in mid-air, rising toward her, dark liquid pulsing in anticipation. And in that moment, the shadows along the walls twisted, forming faces, countless faces, screaming silently, watching, waiting. A single drop fell from the vial, slow as eternity, glistening in the candlelight, suspended above her lips like a suspended heartbeat. The house seemed to inhale, holding time itself, waiting for the next movement, the next sound, the next breath. And then, Sarah's shadow shifted. It stretched impossibly long across the floor, curling toward the mistress, fingers of darkness reaching for her, entwining with the suspended drop. The candle sputtered again, and in that brief flicker the mistress saw it, not the girl herself, but her shadow, towering, commanding, patient. The vial quivered once more, tilting toward her lips. Time slowed. Breath faltered. The air pressed close, and the house waited, knowing what would come next. The air thickened, as though the house itself held its breath. The chalice rose in her trembling hand, porcelain white against the shadows that pooled in every corner. Candlelight fractured across its gilded rim, yet even the soft glow seemed drawn inward, swallowed by the darkness pressed close around her. None spoke, none dared urge her to stop. The servants shrank into the walls, clutching each other, lips moving in silent prayers. Yet the chalice wavered, heavy with a liquid black as iron and grief, and the mistress knew she could not set it down again. Sarah stood at the far edge of the room, silent as a tomb, eyes cast low. Her presence pressed against the mistress like a vice, coiling around her chest and shoulders, constricting, insistent. It was not the girl's hand that guided the chalice, but her shadow, the long, impossible stretch of darkness curling across the floor. Bending toward the mistress with deliberate intent, Esther whispered from the doorway, voice thin as moth wings. "Do not." She calls it. She commands. "They obey," another voice murmured. "They always obey her. The chalice." "Teot hungers," Esther breathed, trembling. The mistress's lips quivered above the black liquid. The scent of iron and earth rose sharply, curling into her nostrils, pressing on her tongue. The chalice's contents pulsed, rippling as though alive, and she felt it drawing her forward, not by weight but by will. Her fingers gripped the porcelain tightly. Her knuckles whitened, yet the substance inside shimmered, beckoning, coaxing. Outside, the wind clawed at the shutters, rattling the panes, carrying the faint, sickly scent of the garden's blackened roses. The hounds whined, low and tremulous, but did not stir from their chained place. The house seemed to lean inward, floorboards sighing, walls breathing, all of it conspiring to hold her in place. To witness the act that would bind her irrevocably, she lowered her lips, and for a heartbeat time folded. The candle flame flickered violently, shadows stretching upward and merging with Sarah's long silhouette. The black liquid trembled in the chalice, pulsing like a heartbeat, the surface forming small ripples that reflected the dark glow emanating from the girl's shadow. A soft hum rose beneath the floorboards, threading through the boards, vibrating through every bone in the mistress's body. It was the hymn, half prayer, half curse, echoing Sarah's silent command. The chalice's liquid seemed to thicken, curling over the rim, hungry for escape. The mistress's breath caught. She hesitated, knowing the moment was final, knowing what had been whispered through the house for nights untold. Once taken, there would be no return. Esther's voice trembled, breaking through the thick, stifling air. Do not taste it. She calls it to you. She calls you, but the mistress could not stop. Not from fear, not from desire, not from the unnameable weight pressing her forward. She drank. The liquid burned, thick and metallic, curling down her throat like molten shadow. The room shivered. The chalice rattled against her hands as though alive, tiny ripples spiraling across the black surface, echoing the pulse beneath the floorboards. The candlelight warped, elongating shadows into monstrous shapes, hands clawing, mouths opening and closing, faces twisted in silent scream. Sarah did not move. She did not speak. Yet her presence filled the room entirely, a suffocating, unbroken chain of silent intent. The shadows pressed closer, reaching, curling around the mistress. Yet she felt no hands, not yet, but the weight of inevitability. The inexorable pull of a curse centuries old. The roses outside quivered violently, thorns glinting in pale moonlight. The hounds howled, low and mournful, as though announcing a death yet to come. And the chalice, emptied at last, did not clatter. It floated in her hand for a heartbeat, dark residue rippling across the surface, before settling silently back on the table. Her body sagged, trembling, knees hitting the floor. Breath came in short, ragged gasps, chest rising and falling like a bell tolling in some unseen cathedral. And beneath her, from the floorboards, a sound, low, wet, deliberate, resonated through the room. Something had shifted, something alive beneath the boards, moving, coiling, pressing upward. A drop of black liquid fell from the chalice, sliding across the table to the edge, then hanging in mid-air, glistening in the candlelight. It pulsed faintly, as though heartbeat and shadow were one. And then, impossibly, it leapt, towards Sarah. The girl's shadow stretched further, long and impossibly wide, enveloping the mistress, the table, the walls themselves. Her lips did not move, yet the house heard the command in a resonance older than any human tongue. The drop of liquid rose, merging with the shadow, absorbed into it, and the air thickened further, pressing against lungs, ears, eyes. Esther gagged, pressing her hand to her mouth. She's taken it. She's bound it. It's hers now. The mistress felt the darkness seep into her, curling along her veins, pressing against every nerve. Her mind teetered, eyes rolling, heartbeat slowed to a deliberate, terrible rhythm. She had drunk the poison, but it was more than poison. It was a summons, a binding, a pact older than her name, older than her house, older than the soil beneath her feet. And through it all Sarah's shadow lingered, stretching impossibly, coiling like smoke, merging with the chalice, the floorboards, the hymn beneath the boards, the roses outside, the hounds whining in the yard. It pressed against the mistress, patient, deliberate, triumphant. A final whisper, faint and impossible, rose from the floorboards. "Yours now." "Yours!" The candle flickered violently one last time, casting elongated shadows across the walls, merging with the darkness of Sarah's presence. And then silence. The mistress's chest heaved, wet with sweat, her lips stained with black residue. She tried to rise, but the shadow of the girl coiled around her legs, pressing her down, holding her in place. And in that instant, the chalice rattled once, softly, as though to mark the beginning of something far larger, far darker than any mortal could yet comprehend. Outside, the wind stilled. The roses drooped, blackened petals brushing the ground. The hounds whimpered, curling into themselves, fearful of the power now awakened within the house, and Sarah, silent as a grave, stepped back into the corner. Her gaze did not lift. Her shadow remained long, stretching impossibly, pressing close, patient, victorious. The mistress's eyes widened as the room darkened further, candlelight flickering against walls that seemed to close in. She was no longer alone, and yet somehow she was fully entangled in a web older than her soul. Beneath the floorboards, the hymn stirred once more. The night split open with a scream that was neither human nor beast. The mistress's cry tore through the chamber, jagged and wild, echoing off the walls like a blade through bone. Her lips curled, teeth bared, breath ripping from her lungs in a haze of fire and iron. The chalice fell from her hand, landing unbroken on the floor, dark liquid pooling and quivering as if recoiling from the force that had erupted. Shadows writhed along the walls, twisting in tandem with the scream, forming grotesque faces and clawed hands that reached hungrily toward the mistress. Sarah remained in the corner, motionless, her gaze cast low. Yet her presence pressed into the room, heavy as stone. The shadow stretching from her lengthened further, curling around the mistress, entwining with her very limbs, pressing her against the floor. The fire in the mistress's lungs was not flame but curse, rising from the chalice, the root, the hymn, the insect dance, all bound by Sarah's silent will. Esther stumbled backward, clutching the doorframe. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "The poison. It's alive. It burns through her veins." The mistress's eyes blackened, pupils swallowed by a darkness that pulsed like liquid shadow. Her throat constricted, coughing sparks and smoke that rose like tendrils, twisting into the candlelight and bending the flames into unnatural shapes. The hymn beneath the floorboards swelled, vibrating through the boards, threading through walls, filling the room with a resonance so deep it shook the teeth in her skull. The roses outside quivered violently, petals black and curling, leaning toward the window as though drawn by the fire erupting within. The hounds whimpered, low and mournful, pressing against the limits of their chains, eyes wide, reflecting the glow of the blackened candlelight. A wet hiss sounded from the chalice, faint, deliberate, as if the liquid inside whispered to itself. The mistress clawed at her throat, gasping for breath, and her hands shook violently. Each pulse of the hymn beneath her feet seemed to ignite her veins, setting her blood alight, coiling around her like molten iron. "Please." "God," Esther whimpered, pressing her hands to her face, voice breaking under the weight of dread. Do not touch it," a servant cried, cowering in a corner. But it was too late. The fire had consumed her from within, a mouthful of darkness that had learned her body as its vessel. The shadows on the walls twisted further, forming impossible shapes, hands clawing from the ceiling, faces emerging from floorboards, mouths wide and silent, echoing the mistress's scream. Her knees hit the floor, but she did not fall fully. Her body was lifted by the force of the curse, suspended by invisible tendrils that curled from Sarah's shadow, merging her with the room itself. The hounds barked suddenly, a single, shivering note that was swallowed immediately by the thick air. Outside, the wind roared, rattling the shutters, carrying the faint metallic tang of blood and earth. The roses leaned more aggressively, thorns glinting, petals folding as though in prayer or in agony. The chalice trembled on the floor, black liquid swirling in response to the mistress's writhing. One droplet jumped from the rim, curling through the air like a serpent, and landed upon the mistress's hand. Where it touched, her skin bubbled faintly, dark smoke rising in spirals that stung the eyes. She recoiled, but the shadow coiling from Sarah pressed her back, bending her will, bending her body. forcing her to bear the fire within. A hiss erupted from the floorboards, louder this time, joined by a low buzzing from somewhere deep in the walls, the remnants of the insect swarm returning, drawn to the chaos. Moths and beetles clattered against the boards, rattling wings like dry bones, forming a vortex of sound and motion. They pressed closer to the mistress, yet none dared touch her. They too seemed to recognize the possession consuming her. The blackness in her eyes deepened, and the fire within her mouth grew hotter, spreading up her throat and into her chest. Each heartbeat became a drum of molten iron, each breath a scream folded into the hymn of the house. She fell to her knees fully, but the shadow from Sarah twisted around her, tightening, pulling her upright, forcing her head back as the fire surged higher. Esther stumbled forward, voice barely a whisper. The girl calls it. It answers her fully now. The mistress's lips parted, a scream forming that was swallowed immediately by the fire erupting within. Her body arched, spine snapping slightly with the invisible force that held her. Smoke spiraled from her mouth, carrying with it the faint scent of iron and earth, curling upward. Twisting into the candlelight, a single shadow broke from the mass in the corner, a long, thin limb of darkness stretching impossibly from Sarah's form, snaking over the floor, over the mistress, pressing into her chest. The chalice trembled again, the liquid inside echoing the pulse of the fire within her. Then silence. Not peace, not relief, but a pause pregnant with inevitability. The mistress collapsed backward, eyes still blackened, lips parted, smoke rising from her mouth, curling into the shadows like tiny serpents. Her fingers twitched once, then still. The chalice lay upright, emptying slowly, black residue trailing across the porcelain like veins. Sarah stepped forward, silent, shadow trailing impossibly long behind her. The air around her seemed to bend, the walls pulsing faintly as though breathing in time with her. The house itself quivered, waiting for what would come next. The roses outside bowed toward her, petals black and glistening, the wind holding its breath, the hounds silent, trembling. Esther's voice broke through, trembling. It is done. But she has changed it. Changed her? The mistress's chest rose and fell, shallow now, yet the fire had not left her. Smoke still drifted from her lips, curling into the shadows, coiling upward, merging with Sarah's presence. The house hummed softly beneath the floorboards, the hymn threading through every beam, every wall, every brick, as if announcing the arrival of something far older than the night itself. The last candle flickered, guttered and cast a single long shadow across the room. It merged the mistress and Sarah's dark presence into one elongated figure, impossibly tall, stretching to the ceiling, bending toward the walls, pressing against the corners, silent yet watching. And somewhere in the corner the chalice trembled once more, as if holding a secret that even the shadows dared not reveal. Dawn broke like a slow, reluctant wound, and the house exhaled a shuddering sigh. The mistress lay slumped in the parlor, chest heaving faintly, her lips blackened, the last traces of fire curling like smoke around her. Yet where Sarah had been there was nothing, no whisper of movement, no shadow trailing along the walls, only the faintest tremor in the floorboards, as if the hymn beneath had been pressed into the house itself. The air smelled of iron, earth and ash, lingering in invisible spirals above the floor. A single beam of pale sunlight struck the chalice's resting place, empty, its porcelain spotless yet marked by a faint, dark residue that seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat trapped in memory. Esther moved cautiously among the shadows, hands trembling, lips pressed to whispered prayers. "She's gone," she breathed, voice cracked, eyes scanning the corners, the rafters, every inch of the silent house. But she sings still. "Can you hear it?" A faint melody rose from the beams above, almost imperceptible. Half prayer, half curse, the song Sarah had carried, threaded beneath the floors and through the walls. It pulsed softly, wrapping around the mistress's ankles, curling upward along the beams, brushing against the eyes of anyone who dared look too closely. Outside, the roses in the garden quivered in the pale light. Their petals, blackened and withered through the nights of shadow and fire, now bloomed anew. Redder than blood, sharper than any human eye could recall, they swayed as though breathing, leaning toward the house with a strange, deliberate intent. Their thorns glinted, catching the first rays of sun, threatening yet beautiful, as if guarding secrets long buried in earth and memory. The mistress rose shakily, limbs trembling, eyes haunted by blackened traces of flame and shadow. The chalice's absence weighed on her like a loss she could not name. No matter where she searched, it was gone, vanished into the folds of shadow. Perhaps carried away with Sarah. Perhaps hidden in some corner of the house that existed only in the girl's silent dominion. Esther whispered again. Trembling, she walked still. In the rafters, in the wind, in the roses. The walls seemed to pulse with the memory of Sarah's presence. The hymn beneath the floorboards threaded upward, vibrating the beams, echoing in hollow corners, curling around the rafters like smoke. One could almost see the long, impossibly stretching shadow of the girl writhe in the light, tendrils pressing against the ceiling, tracing patterns across the plaster. The mistress shivered. Her breath was shallow, her chest tight. She had drunk the chalice. She had survived the fire in her lungs, but she knew in her bones that survival had a price. The house was no longer her domain. She had been touched, bound, and forever marked by Sarah's silent command. Even now, the roses, the song, the air itself reminded her that the girl's presence lingered, patient, deliberate, eternal. A wind rose suddenly, slipping through the cracks of the windows, lifting strands of the mistress's hair and brushing against the thorns of the roses outside. The petals shook violently, glinting like droplets of blood, and the faint hum of the hymn rose sharply, vibrating the beams, echoing the pulse of every shadowed corner. Esther's voice broke the fragile silence. We cannot follow her. She is gone, and yet she is not gone. She waits. The mistress's gaze fell upon the fireplace. Ashes, long cold, yet dark lines seemed to twist and coil within them, forming shapes faintly resembling the girl's long, thin fingers. Her mind recoiled and yet could not look away. It was as if the house itself remembered Sarah, folded her presence into the beams, the floors, the walls, her very essence becoming architecture, woven into every inch of shadow and light. The roses stirred again, petals curling inward for a heartbeat, then blooming wider, sharper, redder. They leaned as though bowing to someone unseen, someone beyond sight, beyond understanding. Each year they would bloom more vibrant, more terrible, more alive, a memory and color of the girl who had walked silently among them. And the chalice. It was never found, not in cupboards, not in corners, not in the soil of the garden. Yet every so often, the faintest glimmer of porcelain could be glimpsed in the periphery, a reflection of candlelight in empty air, a shadow flitting past the rafters, a ripple of black liquid across a surface where no liquid should be. A haunting reminder that some pacts, some curses, never truly leave the world of the living. The mistress sank into a chair, trembling, the weight of what had occurred pressing into her spine, into her blood. She understood now that she was the last witness to something older than cruelty, older than the soil of Tennessee, older than the house itself. Sarah's absence was no absence at all. It was presence in waiting, a shadow stitched into the bones of the world. From the rafters came the faintest trill of the song, rising, curling, wrapping the room in its invisible coils. The roses outside leaned a little closer, their thorns glittering, petals blood-red and perfect. And somewhere just beyond sight, the chalice waited, patient, biding the moment when it might once again choose a lips to kiss, a mouth to bind, a soul to claim. The mistress's eyes widened as the wind carried a whisper through the open window, curling around her ears, brushing her cheek like a lover or a predator. I am here, and I am waiting. The air thickened once more. The house seemed to pulse with memory and intent. And in that pulse, in that vibration, it was clear. Sarah had never truly left.